Okay, cocktail blog number 20. Amazing. I've got so much for this cocktail blog. I actually have a script, and the cocktail for tonight is rum and coke. However, there's so much. I have a chaser. This is Windhoek Draft, or Draught, as it says. So, got this too. All right, let's get to it. All right, so last night was a banner evening. I finished taking data on a whole bunch of stuff. I finished taking data on the Galaxy M83. I finished taking data on the 4-panel mosaic, the Southern Cross, and the coal sack, which is right next to it. And there's a bunch of little things that are hidden in there as well. And the challenge on that will be putting the 4 panels together so that you can't tell that it's 4 different shots. I've never done that before, but apparently there's good tools for it, and you pretty much have to go through and process each of the groups of photos identically, and then you have a shot at making them seamlessly flow together. So that'll be interesting, and that'll be a nice big wide shot. I also finished taking data on the Eagle Nebula, which is up there in Sagittarius. Famous object. People know this as the famous Hubble Space Telescope photo called the Pillars of Creation, the center of the Eagle Nebula. Well, I have a wide shot, but when you zoom in, it actually looks pretty good, so you'll be able to recognize it from that. And after 2 or 3 nights of shooting, I also have 100 5-minute frames on the Small Magellanic Cloud. And I'm very, very anxious to see how that's going to turn out. Big wide field shot, fits in there really nicely. Big star cluster off to the side. That's going to be fantastic. I started to load all the frames for this into the computer today and realized I hadn't shot dark frames at the right temperature and length for that particular shot. So I had to come up here, get the camera going on this scope here, cool it down to minus 15 degrees centigrade, and then shoot 25 5-minute dark frames with the lens cap on. The reason why you shoot dark frames is it's essentially a recording of the camera's self noise, and then during pre-processing, the software looks at this noise print and subtracts it from your light frame, so you get frames without as much noise in them, and so that's a good thing. Speaking of pre-processing, I had so much of it to do today with all these completed images. I want to get the images out. I came up here today before I was even had my coffee. So I loaded up a whole bunch of them into the pre-processing script, which goes through all the steps like normalizing the brightnesses of the shots and removing the noise and aligning the images by color and all of that until you finally end up with a master red, blue, green, and luminance, which may or may not be hydrogen, and you're ready to start making an image out of it. Well, so I did one of those, and I went and had coffee and lunch, and then I came back and did another one, and then went and worked out. And then I came back and loaded up another one and went and had my shower. Hopefully I've got some images to show you in the blog later. So I guess the really big news is I had a date last night for dinner. I had met this lady named Annan who was here with her husband, damn it, about 2 weeks ago. And she was back. She is a tea vendor, and Beyond is her biggest customer. So she was here doing tea seminars for all of the employees here, the staff, which teas are good for this. She talks about tea the way the wine people talk about wine. She can tell you where it was grown, what kind of plant it was, blah, all the way, all the stuff that you can do with wine. When you really know wine, she knows about tea. I thought the British people were the finest tea aficionados around, but she says no, it's the Chinese and the Japanese. The British will basically drink anything. So I thought that was pretty funny. Anyway, just fun to have dinner with somebody. So I had mentioned before about the Tower of Funk band gig being just, scant hours after I get back. And so I heard from Tracy, the lead trumpet player, that he had to take a better paying gig for that night, and could we possibly change it to the week later? And normally we don't change the gigs around, but boy, getting an extra week was great. So I checked with everybody in the club, and yes, that we were able to move that gig a week later. So I've got a week to practice and get back up and running on the trombone before we do this show. And that should be about enough time if I am diligent. So you remember I was working on that arrangement of the Brazilian song. Well, I heard back from the chord police, thank you, Mark, and have the chords in hand now and have pretty much finished orchestrating it all. The chord changes are in the keyboard part, and the harmonies are in the horns when they need to be in harmony. And it's just a few little touch-ups, and I'll be ready to blast out the parts for that. So that's great. I had a breakthrough last night in trying to take wide field shots of the Milky Way with my DSLR camera. I mean, these cameras see a decent amount of sky, but not enough to take a vista of the Milky Way with your eyes. So I have a lens that's supposedly good for it, and I've done some testing about how long an exposure would be, but it's always hard to deal with the exposures afterwards. And so I get just on a lark, I thought, I wonder if the program that I use to process all of the images for these cameras would also read the images that come straight out of the camera. As it turned out, it does. And so I was able to process all of the raw frames from a Milky Way shot and use the noise reduction tools and all of that stuff to make it look good. And so I am really buoyed by this result here. And I'm going to try to find a way to take a mosaic of the entire Milky Way from horizon to horizon here and put it together. I think maybe if I take a stack and then walk that thing across the entire Milky Way, I'm going to have a spectacular high-resolution image that looks pretty damn good for a camera I had basically written off as being useless for this sort of thing. Well, you're probably wondering about the Pluto project, and I can say that, yes, it was a success. I have seen Pluto, and here it is. But I'll tell you, it was a lot harder to get this done than I was expecting. I thought I was just going to load up these two frames, blinky back and forth. Oh, there it is. Didn't work out that way. First of all, it took like 2 hours just to get the images so that they would register on top of each other perfectly and look similar enough that you weren't distracted by how dissimilar the brightness of the background was and all of that stuff. So I really had to get in there and do adjustments, and that required me learning how to do things that I didn't know how to do already. So I watched a couple of YouTube tutorials and got it together. I'm going to do a separate blog post on all of that because it's just a little too much to go into here, but it was fun to know that at least my pre-planning was good enough that I could get it. So last night, super late, it was probably 1:30 or 2, I started a new target. The Large Magellanic Cloud is coming up high enough now as the evening goes on that you can see it with the main scope. And it's too big on its own to fit inside the frame of view of the scope. But there's this area inside the Large Magellanic Cloud called the Tarantula Nebula, NGC 2070. And it is the craziest nebula that you'll find inside a galaxy. It really looks strange. I had shot it once before with rented time on a Southern Hemisphere telescope, but it's going to be fun to shoot it with my own rig while I'm here. So a lot of data for that. I think it's going to look terrific, but you can't start until 1:30 or 2 in the morning. So I had an idea. Back on New Year's Day, I produced a video of my nebula photographs from the Northern Hemisphere called Northern Nebulas. It's available on YouTube, and I'll put a link in the comments below. And I thought it came out very well. I used Ron Esposito's music underneath it, but this time I'm going to write something. So I'm going to be producing a video called Beneath African Skies, which will feature some of the scenery around here and the photos that I've shot while I'm here with some music that I've written. So I'm looking forward to that. When people arrive here at the resort, mostly they arrive by plane or they drive in on some kind of Land Rover or some car that they're in. Well, yesterday a guy arrived here on a bicycle. He'd been on some kind of bicycle tour of Namibia with a guide, and they both arrived, and he was saying how difficult it is to ride a bike on these gravel roads. But on these super rough gravel roads that they have around here, it's really tough, and you really have to watch what you run over, because if you slice a tire, you're walking. So it was very interesting to find a guy showing up on a bicycle. I thought that was pretty hilarious. Last night, I didn't get out of here until about 4:45. And as I was walking the path back to get to my quarters, I looked up and I saw the crescent moon, and I saw Mars and Jupiter. So the next guy who's coming in at the end of September, he's going to have 2 planets to show people, whereas I only have Saturn. And Saturn is looking kind of weak these days because this is one of the years where the rings are almost edge on. There's a 15-year open and closed cycle, and we are almost at the point where Saturn doesn't even look like it has rings. So for that year, everybody gets gypped. Well, chaser time. That's it for Cocktail Blog number 20. Watch out for all these new images coming. I think they're really going to be good. Thanks for watching. Carpe Noctem. All right, here it is. Cocktail Blog number... me. Oh! Takes a licking and still keeps on recording.